Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fridays with Vistage webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some items that will help you participate in today's webinar. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the webinar session, please dial support at 888-259-8414. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Bill Black.
Welcome to Fridays with Vistage. My name is Bill Black. I'm a fellow Vistage member and your moderator today. Today's title of our webinar is Fostering Engagement with Employee Feedback. You know, asking employees for their feedback about your company comes with great responsibility to actually take action on the data you collect. Well, today, Emplify Product Owner Megan McNames will give you the ammunition you need to make employee voice a priority for increased business value. Megan is a regular speaker and former collegiate instructor with a background in full-stack user experience design, including user research and visual, interaction, and information design. In her role as a product owner at Emplify, she defines and drives the strategy, design, and positioning of employee engagement products that enable businesses to adopt an employee-focused, participatory approach to engaging their workforces. Megan previously taught at the Center for Emerging Media Design and Digital Media minor programs at Ball State University, where she earned her master's degree in journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan McNames.
Great, thank you, Bill. Well, before I start today, I want to take a minute to thank you and Vistage especially for hosting me. I think what I'm about to talk about is really important for modern businesses, so I really appreciate having that platform on which to talk about employee voice and employee engagement. So thank you again. And thank you to those in the audience for attending today. I hope that by the end of my presentation, you'll have a lot of thoughts in your head about how you can start to bring employee voice into your business and really help employees feel ownership in the business. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Today's webinar is Power to Your People. So my name is Megan McNames, and today I'd really like to help you develop a framework for gathering constructive employee feedback and using that feedback to foster engagement in your organizational culture. So as Bill said, my background is in user experience design, and I conduct a lot of user and subject matter research here at Emplify. Some of what I will share today with you comes from primary research that I keep up with in the academic world, and some of it comes from what I've learned here at Emplify as we've collected thousands of sets of employee engagement data from our customers. So the focus of this webinar and a main purpose of implementing employee feedback programs is to foster engagement. My assumption is that most of you are here because you want to increase engagement at your organization, and you know that employee voice is one really important way to do that. So here at Emplify, we define engagement as an employee's intellectual and emotional connection with an employer. Engagement is demonstrated by employees who are motivated and committed to positively impacting your company goals and vision. Engaged employees are employees who invest their whole selves into their work. They work hard and they do a good job because they want to, because they've put something into the organization. They want to see the organization that they're so heavily invested in get something out of their work and have an impact in the world. Unfortunately, today about 70% of employees report disengagement from their work. And this toll the toll it takes on an organization can be devastating. Disengagement can cause companies to have 50% more turnover than their engaged counterparts, 22% less utilization and productivity, and disengaged organizations are 33% less profitable than their engaged counterparts. So one thing that we'll come back to is that you can't improve what you can't measure. Some of you may or may not actually all be that interested in employee engagement, and that's really okay. Maybe you're more interested in something like satisfaction or some other aspect of employment. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that you have something about your business that you can measure that can help you understand how invested your employees are in your business and in helping you to achieve your business goals. So here at Emplify, we believe that the best thing to measure is engagement, because it gets at the heart of your employees' attitudes toward your company and the work that they do every day. Essentially, measuring engagement gives us a simple framework from which to understand problems at a really high level and to understand them from a really human perspective. We can measure psychological aspects of our employees in order to understand the workplace. We think that's really important here at Emplify. So in today's webinar, I'm going to talk about the important role that employee feedback plays in engagement. There we go. So I'm sorry, I accidentally pressed the back button instead of the forward button. There's a scientific link between how much employees are invited to use their voice in the workplace and positive outcomes like engagement. So workplaces that listen to employee voices tend to be much more engaged than workplaces that don't. So to help you create an engaging workplace, I'd first like to talk a little bit about what employee voice is, just so that we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about when I say those words employee voice and why it's so important that you foster voice at your organizations. Then I'd like to talk about the right mindset for fostering voice. And I want to talk about some of the problems that stand in the way of listening to employee voice with feedback programs. And finally, give you some best practices and examples for starting to foster voice in your own organizations. I don't want to spend too much time talking about employee voice. As Bill said, I taught at Ball State for 7 years before I came to Emplify, so I tend to be kind of academic, and I like to get the definitions out during presentations and just make sure that we all agree on what it is we're talking about. It's like a very teacherly approach that I'm used to, but teacherly approaches are not always the most exciting for you in the audience. So I'm going to try to get through this sort of definitional section somewhat quickly. Employee voice is defined as the discretionary communication of ideas, suggestions, concerns, or opinions about work-related issues. And the important thing here is that employees use their voice to improve organizational functioning. Even at their kind of most complainy, employee voice is really about making the workplace and organization better. Your complainers want work conditions to improve, but they don't always go about seeking that improvement in the most constructive way. And if you don't have any systems or mechanisms in place to foster constructive voice, you can end up with a lot of non-constructive voice behaviors. Employee voice takes 3 primary forms that are positive. Employees speak up when they want to help you identify problems, when they want to make suggestions for improvements, and when they want to help you understand who they are and how they think so that you can make better decisions about the workplace that you are building for them. So employees communicate problem-focused messages because they want to protect your business from harm. And employees communicate suggestion-focused messages because they want to make your business better. There's opportunity that they're seeing that they're just concerned others at the organization may not be seeing. Employees, these are typically captured in programs like suggestion boxes, gain sharing programs, entrepreneurship, and some companies are even starting to do hackathons where they might take a weekend to invite everybody in to solve a big problem in the business. Employees communicate attitude-focused messages because they want you to understand their point of view so that you can make better decisions about how you treat them and how the organization fits kind of who they are and what they want to get out of work. So they're expressing themselves, not just to express themselves, but because they hope it will help you to understand them better and kind of see their point of view and where they're coming from. And attitude-focused messages are typically captured by focus groups, or we have a lot of customers here who do leadership tours, the CEO, the CFO, whoever wants to be the face of the leadership group will kind of have lunch with a different department every month, things like that. Attitude-focused messages can also be captured by discussions with managers on a daily basis. So sometimes these employee voice behaviors are happening on a really large level, like a leadership tour. Sometimes they're happening on a small level, like daily discussions with managers just about how things are going. And finally, they can be captured by surveys, and this is one of the techniques that I'm going to talk a lot about today because we really believe in it here at Emplify. So what are some of the things that stand in the way of employee voice? Well, at the end of the day, no matter what kind of feedback program you implement, you have to remember that employee voice is all about improving the business. the sort of unexpected irony of employee voice, I think, is that the people who use it the most are actually usually the most engaged people at your organization. People often expect the opposite to be true, that the people who speak out a lot are kind of the gripers or the people who have an axe to grind, and sometimes they are those people, but by and large, people who use employee voice are people who are invested in your organization. So what stands in the way of workplaces fostering employee voice is that those people who have a potential to be highly engaged don't see how that's possible. They don't see how they can use that voice constructively. It's beneficial to have a workplace where employees are freely voicing, and they're just not sure that they can do it freely. Employees often can't use their voice because they feel like, oh, sorry, I have neglected to advance the slides. Just a couple of the benefits of employee voice. Employee voice is just tied very highly to all kinds of positive outcomes: increased satisfaction, decreased stress, increased motivation. Organizational programs that are really geared toward fostering voice and allowing employees to speak freely and talk about areas that they'd like to see improved also contribute to lower costs, higher productivity, and greater return on direct hours worked. And so what's standing in the way is that employees just feel that they're going to suffer some kind of harm by speaking up. This could be reputation, they don't want to be seen as the complainer. It could be a perceived negative impact to their pay or to their role. Maybe they won't get a promotion if they complain too much. One of the biggest detriments to employees using their voice is oftentimes not even that the mechanisms aren't there. You might have a suggestion box, but people don't feel safe going up to it and putting anything into it. The other is low perceived efficacy. So employees just simply believe that no one is listening. If employees feel that it's either unsafe to say anything or that saying anything won't result in any kind of action, they're just going to keep their voice to themselves. And when they keep their voice to themselves, your business is missing out on all those opportunities to increase productivity and eliminate problems. And it's also missing out on an opportunity to really engage those employees. So how can we foster employee voice in order to improve engagement? How can we kind of fight against these very common roadblocks in the way of employee voice, the lack of safety and the lack of efficacy? Well, I'm sorry to say, but the feedback programs of the past simply don't cut it anymore. I like to call this sort of traditional approach to feedback programs the suggestion box mindset. Unfortunately, this is what many employees think about when they think about employee voice. They think of, suggestion boxes where a slip of paper goes in one end and never comes out the other, right? Nobody looks at it. The suggestion box mindset is simply too impersonal for today's workforce. It values processes and tools over people. It offers too many documented rules and regulations for employees to believe that they actually work or that their own voice can be successful in getting through all of that red tape. They're all about an employee putting his or her suggestion forward so that it can be picked apart by a sort of invisible group of higher ups rather than discussed and understood. The suggestion box mindset values following a plan versus responding to change. So ultimately, implementation of kind of big sweeping feedback programs like suggestion boxes or gain sharing are just simply not enough. They're not human enough for today's workforce. So on the right is what we might expect employees to think about when submitting suggestions to our suggestion boxes. But on the left is how they really feel. Gone are the days of sort of, if we make a suggestion box, people will put something in it. There's no more, if you build it, they will come. Big sweeping feedback programs like suggestion boxes and gain sharing, they take months to build and they require a lot of effort to maintain. They require a lot of reminders for employees that they exist and that they need to be used. So the sort of suggestion box mindset is a bit like this sidewalk. Building a big feedback program and kind of spending a lot of time encouraging employees to use it is a bit like being a leader, if you're going really fast, you've got this bicycle in this image, the leader's on a bike, they're moving really fast, they know everything about the business, they're going a lot faster than a lot of other people in the business, they see where they're going, and it's really easy to spend all this time and money building this really great sidewalk, right? Like, we know where this business is going, we know exactly what we need to do, we're going to make this nice sidewalk that is paved, and it's going to get us where we're going. But what happens is it's just not what employees are thinking and how they're thinking and what they're doing. Employees are just kind of going to do what it is that they do. If they see a better way, they're going to take it. So in this example, the faster way for employees was to just walk across the grass. So if employees see a better way to express their voices or to become engaged in their work, they're going to take those other avenues. So for most people, the workplace is a rental car in which they feel no ownership, unfortunately. Especially when it comes to these top-down feedback programs like suggestion boxes, leadership wants employee commitment. Leadership wants to build that nice, beautiful sidewalk and get all the employees to use it, but employees have no real say or stakes in that game. For employees, it's actually easier to just walk across the grass. So rather than talk to you today about how to implement a suggestion box or what cadence on which you should, send surveys about what employees like about their employers, I want to instead offer you sort of the antithesis of the suggestion box mindset, and that is the Agile engagement mindset. If you really want to foster voice and ingrain employee voice into your workplace, systems like suggestion boxes and gain sharing don't work all that well anymore. Instead, you need to change your culture. You need to adopt an Agile engagement mindset. The Agile engagement mindset really is the opposite of what I've described as the suggestion box mindset. It values employees and talking to them over sterile forms and other impersonal tools. It values promoting the things that work rather than trying to define programs in comprehensive documentation. It's all about collaborating with employees rather than simply reviewing their feedback and responding to change quickly over following a big, ambitious plan. It's all about building a feedback program with micro moments instead of big sweeping plans. So with an Agile mindset, if we see employees taking this path, we don't get upset that they didn't use our beautifully well-designed paved path that worked perfectly for our leadership team who were going really fast on their bikes. Instead of worrying that employees haven't done what we asked them to do, we need to adjust our thinking to the employee thinking. So we build the path that the employee helps us to see. We support what the employees see as the way to go. So when I first started teaching, I was actually really a quite horrible teacher, I have to admit. I had a colleague come to a few of my classes to try to help me understand just where I was failing these students, and I thought that she really expertly diagnosed my problem. I'm a person with very high standards, and I don't get very happy when people fail to meet those standards, but she said something to me that honestly changed the way that I taught and the way I help people to reach my high standards. It got me thinking from more of a suggestion box, more of a, I'm in charge of the classroom and you kind of have to rise to my standards, to more of an Agile mindset. And she said, you have to teach the students that you have, not the students that you want. So I really wanted Ivy League students who stayed up all night doing my massive amounts of homework, right? I wanted students who magically already knew to read all the books I would have suggested anyway. But instead, I had these kids who had struggled in high school. They left my class and they went to a home where they raised younger siblings, or they went after class to a job where they washed dishes for 10 hours. When I was in school, I did nothing but school. I wanted to be on, the Ivy League path, but my students weren't like that. My students had a different experience. And as soon as I realized that I had to reach the students that I have instead of the ones that I want, I realized that I can turn them into the ones that I want, right? If I start where they are, we're going to get a lot further together by working together and responding to each other's needs than if I were to continue just demanding, I know your life is hard, but please try to be an Ivy League student. So having an Agile mindset is all about recognizing that you're not always going to have a workforce of ideal employees. But if you work on reaching the employees that you do have, you give them opportunities to become more of that ideal employee. If you give them opportunities to use their voice constructively, they'll start to use their voice constructively. You want to reach them where they are, and if you don't, they can never really get better, just worse. So when we have an Agile mindset, we recognize that if we bring our employees into our business and ask for their help in fostering their own voice, they're going to help build a culture that suits their needs. We're going to understand them better and build something that is going to actually be built, in their image, something that they understand that they have a part of forming. You won't have to guess about what they need to do better work and be more productive, because they'll guide you. You can certainly build the sidewalk, but if you see them taking the grass path, find out what's so great about that grass path and find out how you can support that grass path. So by allowing employees to guide us, we get their buy-in. People support what they help create. If you nail a suggestion box on the wall of the break room, don't expect a lot of suggestions. But if you ask your employees to come up with a way for them to give you suggestions, and they decide for themselves on a suggestion box and they go hang that box up themselves, they're going to be a lot more invested in making sure that it gets used and making sure that it works, because they don't want their project to fail. Another way of looking at it is this: if we have a suggestion box mindset, we kind of already know what we want to make. We ask our employees to sit around and wait while we figure it all out, and the whole time there's still no way to give suggestions, right? But if we think with an agile mindset, we do the smallest possible thing that we can to start fostering the idea of suggestions. Maybe we take suggestions verbally at the end of each quarterly meeting, but then we hear from employees that they would rather write the suggestions down. So we take suggestions at the end of the quarterly meeting on note cards, but we hear from employees that they would rather have more opportunities to turn these note cards in, so we take them at all meetings where the leadership team is at attendance. And anytime a leader is around, you can give them a note card with your suggestion. But now we hear from employees that we want more updates about what the suggestions are and which ones are getting implemented, so now we do something else. Maybe we, at every quarterly meeting, announce which suggestions were implemented. And we can go on and on here, but the point is that we ended up not with a suggestion box, but with something better, something the employees actually had a hand in making. We started really small, and then we asked the employees to give us feedback on how we were doing. I always like to say, if you can't start with good, start with bad and criticize your way to good. And this agile mindset technique is a way for you to start with something that's okay, but allow your employees to criticize it into something that's really good, right? I'll give them an opportunity to give feedback and stretch their employee voice muscles in creating a better employee voice program. So building in small steps and listening to feedback always gets us further than making people wait while we try to figure it all out with some kind of big sweeping program. So to review, what's more important than coming up with a big suggestion program is being agile. It's about thinking in this way with these values, valuing individuals and interactions over rules and processes, valuing starting small with a working product rather than trying to spend a lot of time making lots of rules. In the note card example, we start with one basic thing. Hey, tell us your suggestions at the end of the meeting. That's something that actually works, that you can start tomorrow and allow employees then to give you feedback on where it should go next. We value employee collaboration over contract negotiations, so talking to employees about their ideas rather than collecting their ideas and talking about them without them present, and responding to change over valuing a path. So why does this approach work so well? Well, it's all about adapting. The workforce today is already so different from what it was even just 10 years ago. I was talking to an Emplify customer last spring, and I was absolutely fascinated by what he was telling me. He worked in his field for decades before he started his own company in that field. And in his lifetime, he has seen the makeup of his employees almost completely reversed. When he started, it was a male-dominated field, and pretty much every man who worked in the field could support his family off of the salary that they received. But today, 9 out of 10 of his own employees are women. Some have partners who work, some don't, and they work really hard. They're also more on the millennial spectrum, which is a age group much different from his own. And essentially, his point was that the workforce is just not the same, and he's trying to figure it out. He's trying to understand how these changes have affected what it means to work in his field. So how can we build feedback programs and foster engagement for a workforce that looks nothing like the ones many of us remember when we were in those workforces? This is the challenge for all of us. the workforce is changing in so many ways. Millennials are now the largest generation in the workforce. They care more about fairness and transparency than previous generations and less about rewards and recognition. 17% of workers now use mobile devices to do their work. Freelancers make up 34% of the workforce now. So the times are changing, and in addition to adopting an agile mindset, there are 4 ways that we can deal with these changing workplaces. The first one is to really get a handle on what I call your employee chemistry, right? Undertake an attitude or engagement survey to really understand where everyone in your organization is at. Your workforce probably looks a lot different today than it did 20, 30, 40 years ago, so try to understand that makeup of your workforce. What are they thinking and feeling about your organization, and whether or not your organizational culture and climate is set up for success in fostering their engagement and voice, or whether it needs some work. So in terms of discovery, don't wait for employees to come to you. Take the initiative to just get a baseline understanding of who they are, what their attitudes toward work are, and where they stand. And I have 3 best practices for you on this one. The first is to go wide. If you assess attitudes toward only a few drivers of engagement or a few aspects of your workplace, like benefits, you risk missing out on understanding what really impacts your employees. There might be things that you didn't even think to ask about that are very important to them. So here at Emplify, our survey collects feedback on 14 key drivers of engagement, as well as 3 necessary conditions for engagement in the workplace. Sometimes we kind of get asked, oh my gosh, why so many? Well, we don't want to miss anything, right? We don't want to do a short survey and find that we couldn't find any problems with just a few questions. The second best practice is to seek to understand attitudes, not preferences. I'm sure that your employees all prefer to get paid more, for example, but their attitudes can actually be more important. More than half of employees in the annual Hays What Workers Want survey last year said that they would take a pay cut in exchange for an organizational culture that better fits their view of work. The third best practice is to measure in ways that help you pinpoint areas of difference in your business. When you aggregate results of attitude surveys across your organization, you tend to kind of smudge out the outliers. They cancel each other out. So maybe everyone at your organization is feeling safe to use their voice in your organization, but one department has a manager who makes them feel very unsafe. If you're not measuring in a way that helps you pinpoint that manager, the overall result is going to show an average of, everyone's feeling pretty safe. You're going to miss that area that is an outlier that has a problem. So as a quick example of how discovery surveys can help you foster voice, I want to show you some survey results that came across my desk recently. What we see here is a part of our survey tool that measures safety, how safe employees feel to speak out and use their voice. At this particular organization, people are not feeling very safe, especially in the role of site foreman. This is an organization where traditional means of fostering employee voice, such as suggestion boxes and focus groups, simply aren't going to work. Until that safety issue gets resolved, no one is going to be speaking up about anything. So knowing this before you embark on any kind of employee voice or feedback program is critical. You can't create employee voice and foster it in your organization if you don't have that baseline level of safety that employees need to even feel like it's going to be successful. So anytime you send a discovery survey, you also want to give yourself the opportunity to follow up on what you found. So this screenshot here is showing the results of that bad safety score that we just saw. We just asked the site foremans why they aren't feeling safety. What can this organization keep doing to improve safety, and what can they start or stop to make safety, to make everyone feel more safe to speak out. And this helps us solve that problem of safety so that we can start to foster more voice. And of course, the thing that I love about these kinds of discovery surveys is that just by sending this survey and following up on it, we're already starting to foster feedback and voice, because we're sending the message to our employees that we are listening and that we are going to do something about what we hear. So I would suggest to all of you who aren't conducting these kind of discovery surveys that you start doing so immediately. There are tons of resources and products for doing this. If you don't know where to start, An easy place to start is just to go to surveymonkey.com and use their employee engagement template. If you aren't sure if it's right for your business, you could use that template and send it to just 1 or 2 departments as a trial run to see how it goes. Of course, I work for an employee engagement survey company, so I will give you my contact information at the end of the webinar, and I would love to talk to you about how we can start measuring your workplace as well. But if this is an area where you really want to dip your toes in, you're just not sure what you want to do, there's so many resources that you can find out there, sample surveys that you can just try a little bit of and see how it works for you. The second context for fostering employee voice is to ask employees to devise solutions to problems in your business. When something isn't right, whether you're finding that there's like too much waste on the cutting room floor or communication between departments is too siloed, invite your employees to propose solutions. This is different than just an overall suggestion box because you're going to go to the employees with a specific problem. You're going to ask them how to solve it. And the best practices here are to leverage employee knowledge. Leverage employee knowledge, set constraints, and avoid simply giving employees the opportunity to check boxes. Don't simply say, you know, we're going to solve this problem with option A, B, or C. Which one do you want? That doesn't actually support voice. It just allows people to make kind of some surface level decisions. And then for setting context, let employees know what the problem is and why you're interested in solving it, but also let them know what you're going to do with their suggestions. The idea here behind asking employees to come in and work with devising solutions is that the person who's closest to the work is the person who knows more about it than anybody else. So when you have a problem that you need to solve, simply seeking out employees who are closest to that problem and asking them how they're experiencing that problem and what their own suggestions are for improving it helps them feel heard and respected for their knowledge of the problem. Just as an example, here at Emplify, we have a customer, TH Marine, a ship accessory manufacturer in Huntsville, Alabama. They have about 70 employees across 3 locations. And they took our engagement survey and found that their production team was giving the lowest ratings on a lot of different aspects of their work. The lowest drivers of their engagement were utilization and feedback. So the employees were feeling that they had a lot of skills that weren't being utilized, but they also weren't getting a lot of feedback or able to give a lot of feedback. And so TH Marine invited their production team to a Kaizen meeting. You might be familiar with this technique. It's from the Toyota way. They took action on the suggestions that resulted from that meeting. And what's really interesting about TH Marine is our survey found a lot of kind of deep-seated issues around employees' attitudes and feelings. But at the end of the day, when leadership followed up with their employees about what the problems were, they were very solvable problems. The guys on the production floor were having utilization issues because they didn't have modern technology to move boat parts around their facility. So a lot of the suggestions that they gave in their suggestion meeting was very actionable, and the company ended up purchasing forklifts for the production floor. Seems like a really simple fix, and it is, right? If you can just buy something to solve the problem, that's fantastic. Production's meeting improved from terrible to above average, their scores on the survey, and there was a 30% increase in productivity, which equated to a $2.8 million gain in profit. So essentially, there were a lot of really great employees on the floor who are awesome at their jobs, but they're just struggling with not having modern equipment. And as soon as they were able to make some suggestions on what kinds of modern equipment would help them, they were able to make this huge impact to their business. The third context for helping employees to use their voice is in asking them to help you deploy solutions. So in addition to collecting their suggestions for improving problems, have them test out solutions. When they test out solutions, keep it low risk. So give them an opportunity to try some of their suggestions that doesn't cost a lot of money or throw a wrench in your workflow. Seek feedback on how well employees feel that those solutions are being implemented and making a difference on the problem. Make sure you communicate the results. So I always say kind of treat this like an experiment, right? When you want to make changes to the business, treat it like an experiment and ask employees to run the experiment and report back on it. So just a quick example from our office, again, something that is very actionable that improves engagement. We just have a really big office that has like 15 to 20 foot ceilings. It's just a giant, open office. Pretty much everybody is out in the same room together. Some people love it, some people not so much. And feedback that we were getting all the time from a lot of our employees was just, I have trouble concentrating. People are always coming up to my desk and asking me for stuff. And like, I'm busy and I'm sitting at my desk because I have work to do. So we took some suggestions around the office on how we could solve this. The suggestions that were most feasible were things like this idea of having like a go light, right? Where if you have a light at your desk, you can turn it on if you're busy, so people see the light and they know not to come up to you and not to bother you. And if the light is off, they know that you're free to be approached. And so we just ran this as an experiment. Some of the people in the office who were most concerned about this issue, who had made the suggestion, we bought them a couple different kinds of lights to keep at their desk, and they tried them out, and we sought feedback on what worked. And again, the irony is sometimes these solutions are really simple. These like $3 light bulbs ended up being the best solution. We had looked at all kinds of solutions that were like USB lights that you could wire together and you could control them with the internet and all this stuff. It's just a light bulb. It costs $3 per desk, and it's worked really well. And we tried it as an experiment and got feedback until we discovered this was the right kind of light, and the light was the right kind of solution. And this is now a system that everybody here knows that works really well and allows us to focus more. So the fourth context for inviting employees to use their voice is in asking them to help with decision making. And decision making best practices are really just to communicate the role of employee voice in decision making. So let employees know how you're using their voice when you make decisions. If you go back to the light example, leadership rolling out the whole program, it's best for them actually to kind of take the people who tested the lights and have them talk to the rest of the company about why they chose them, why they thought this was a good solution. And that clearly communicates to everybody that, wow, my voice did make a difference. Because remember, the two biggest blockers to employees using their voice is that they don't feel safe to do so, and they don't feel that it's going to result in any kind of outcome. So anytime you make decisions that took into account employee voice, just communicating that, taking the person who gave the suggestion or taking the people who ran the experiment and gave feedback on it and putting them in front of the company and having them talk about the decision and why it was made really communicates that you're listening. So a quick case study, another one of our customers, Steel Encounters, they're located in Salt Lake City. They're a full service steel fabricator and installer. They have about 265 employees across 4 locations. They took our engagement survey and they found that they had kind of some divisions that were lower in engagement than others. They struggled with, again, utilization, so employees feeling like they have these great skills but they're not being used, some fairness issues, some manager relation issues, and this organization became kind of laser focused on this one location. This one location was really struggling a lot more than others. They ended up actually removing one of the engineer managers there and coached the remaining managers on having radical candor. So they coached the remaining managers on being less of kind of controlling managers and more on supporting managers, right? In the classroom, we always think about this as like the lecture versus facilitator, right? So when I taught, I learned to become a facilitator. I facilitate students learning. I don't deliver learning to students as much as sometimes they kind of are like, just tell me what's in the book. I don't just deliver learning. I facilitate their process of learning. So the managers were coached on that same idea, right? Like facilitating the process of employees having a good understanding of the business and managing the work, and coach them on radical candor. So being able to talk freely and openly about tough issues. They held an open forum to discuss the results and gather feedback. And so what they were really able to do was to show that with just one location that was struggling, they were able to show the entire organization that they really do listen, right? They looked at the results of the survey. They were very concerned about them. They put effort into making improvements. They held an open forum so that everybody could see how the survey went and could see, could weigh in on, why they thought the survey went that way. And so everybody could see the changes that they were making. And their struggling division ended up increasing their engagement by 11 points on a 100-point scale. And their their engineers increased their engagement by 20 points. So anytime you do anything that brought employee voice in to make decisions, let employees know how that voice affected those decisions. So really quickly, how can you start today to foster employee voice? One thing that I did that is kind of a little tough in this presentation is I kind of said, a suggestion box isn't going to do it for you. You have to have these micro moments. You have to, it's a lot, in some ways it's easier because it takes the pressure off of you. You don't have to have a big idea for a feedback program and make it happen. You can foster voice and engagement in really small ways, but it can make it a little bit harder to kind of get started, right? Where do you get started when you're just trying to foster these micro moments of letting employees use their voice? My suggestion is just to start small. You don't have to have it all figured out today. Don't start with the full feedback program. Experiment your way to one. Remember, if you can't start with good, start with bad and criticize your way to good. So experiment with a new project. If you have some projects that are coming down the pipelines that are going to be employee facing, start talking to employees however you can to understand their attitudes, what they have to say to leadership and how they can feel most successful saying it. You can do this either broadly with a discovery survey, or you can do it specifically around the new project that's coming in the pipeline. If the new project is a benefits related project, start talking to employees however you can about how they're feeling about benefits. A discovery survey, I think, is hugely illuminating here, even if you do have a specific project that you want to start with. Oops, going the wrong direction. There we go. Experiment with a current project that isn't just starting up. Pick something that you've already started and figure out where you are in the process of making it. If you're at that devise phase where you're starting to come up with solutions, think about how you can bring employees into those discussions of solutions. And it can be as simple as taking your book of ideas to the group that is going to end up using the thing you come up with and just getting some feedback on the direction that you're going. Letting employees know that you're interested in the very early stages of the project, what their feedback and thoughts are. And remember that they know the work the best because they're the closest to it. And so use them as that knowledge resource. If you were in the decision-making process, talk to employees about the repercussions of the decisions. Bring them into what the different decision points are. Here's the three things we're deciding between. What does a decision on each of these three things possibly mean for you? And just let employees know and show them with just these small conversations that you are interested in how all of this is going to impact them. And at the end of the project, they're going to know that they were heard. They're going to feel ownership of what you came up with because they know that you made the decision with their thoughts and feelings in mind. So just ask yourself, where can I start to bring in these micro moments of asking employees for feedback? If you're in the discovery phase, can you interview, survey, or otherwise collect information from employees to better understand their thoughts on this topic? If you're in the devise stage, can you invite employees to come up with ideas or suggestions? If you're in the deploy stage, can you invite them to try out some aspect of your proposed solution? If you're about to buy a bunch of new equipment, could you, and you're not sure it's the right thing to do, could you buy one piece of it and have some employees try it out and then weigh in on it? And then decide, can you invite employees to weigh in on a recent change or help you figure out the pros and cons of different sides of a decision? So that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this presentation. I'd like to, we've got some great questions ahead of time that I'm really excited about answering. So I'd love to hand it back to Bill for questions.
Megan, great information, very well put and very clear. Thank you very much for that presentation. We have a few questions here. Number one is, we became a 100% employee-owned company this year and wanted some thoughts on how to build on this and the fact that we're all beneficial owners now.
Yeah, I love this question. So first of all, congratulations, because that is a huge accomplishment for an organization. Research suggests that employee-owned organizations are actually much more engaged than their counterparts. So I'm guessing that you've probably already kind of received that bump in engagement just from that change alone. And so there's some things that we know make for engaged workplaces where employee voice is fostered. And I think one of the biggest issues that might arise in a situation where an organization has recently become employee-owned is that of big group decision making. So employees who are stakeholders in the business want to be involved in making decisions about it. And it's not always practical to achieve when everybody is an owner of the business. So I would highly suggest that you actually check out the book Empowerment and Democracy in the Workplace by John R. Dew. It has a ton of practical tips and advice on managing a more democratic workplace. Dew specifically gets into large group decision making, and he has 2 chapters that are on how to facilitate decision making when everybody in the company feels like they should have a stake in the decision. He outlines strategies for making sure that all employees know what they have the power to make decisions on, what they don't have the power to make decisions on, and just outlines what I think is a really great process for that big group decision making when you want everyone to feel, you know, this is an employee-owned business. I should be able to make some of these decisions, but it's just impractical for a large number of people to sit in a room and talk it out. So he has some really great techniques for making decisions quickly across the business without spending a lot of time, you know, arguing and having to have discussions on things. So it's actually a pretty quick and easy read too. I really like it. Again, that book is called Empowerment and Democracy in the Workplace by John Dew. You don't have to read it chapter by chapter, which is one thing that I really like. You can kind of get value out of it immediately. But at the end of the day, the point of the book and big group decision making is to do everything that you can. Technology is a great way to do this, to turn decision making from a, you know, get in a room and talk it out to a process in which, you know, smaller groups kind of put forth proposals and everybody else is able to weigh in and vote on them. So
Excellent.
That would be my
Excellent.
suggestion. Yeah.
Terrific. Empowerment and democracy in the workplace.
Yes.
Right? Great. Okay, so here's a big challenge for you. How do we engage the lonely staff members who work the third shift?
Yeah, I love this question. I would be curious with that question what kind of engagement the person who asked this is interested in. I'm going to assume that it's work engagement and not, you know, like engagement in some kind of particular program. So I will tell you something that I've learned from looking through our own engagement data here at Emplify that is somewhat surprising. Employees who work third shift or work at field locations are often, but not always, more engaged than their counterparts. So our best guess is that it's kind of because there's a lot more autonomy and a lot more role clarity. When you're working the night shift, you're working in a field situation, you're more likely to see the work happen directly. So you see the output of your work, and that helps you feel good about it. And I really want to do more research on this, but I also kind of feel like maybe there's just fewer supervisors around at night to kind of like make decisions for you and be critical of your work. So not always, but often these people are more engaged. So without knowing whether or not this is true for the person who asked this question, I would maybe focus on the idea that the people who do the work are closest to it and more likely to understand it deeply. So if you have a concern that people who work third shift are having kind of a different experience from the people who are working during the day, I would maybe rely on those third shift workers to make some improvements that are right for them that maybe the people who are working during the day wouldn't think about, right? Could you task them with improving the facilities or the processes that take place specifically at night? You might even set them on the task of connecting more with you. If you're feeling kind of a disconnect with the third shift employees, you know, maybe you don't know who they are as well because you're not there when they're there. Set them on solving that problem. You know, ask them what they'd like day shift workers to know about the night shift and have them come up with some ways to share more of themselves and their work with everyone else. So if you're trying to engage these workers with your mission, vision, and values, for example, have them come up with some special values that represent the unique contribution of the third let your overall goals. Let the rest of your company hear from them, you know, what they're doing and how they're doing it.
All right, and listeners, please, if you have any questions, please let us know by typing them into the toolbar on the right of your screen. We have a few more here, Megan. How about Danny Dowder? How do you reconcile feedback from the employees who just have a negative attitude and can't be pleased no matter what management does?
Yeah. So full disclosure, I have been one of those employees, I'm sad to say. This is kind of the dark side of engagement. I'm one of those people, I just absolutely love my job. Like I love what I do more than anything other than the people in my life. And I don't have a spouse or kids, you know, I have cats and this job. This job is really what I do all day, every day. I love the work that I do. It's so important to me. But when you're as engaged as I am, it's really, really easy to be disappointed or get frustrated with work. And that's kind of the dark side of engagement. You ask employees to put their whole selves into achieving your business goals, and sometimes those goals don't get met, or the ideas that someone has who they believe can help meet those goals don't get implemented. So even then, it goes back to some of the larger issues like how safe your employees are feeling. If you have someone who is typically engaged and they're struggling and they're feeling, you know, disappointed or frustrated, is there something else going on there? Which of the drivers of engagement is getting in the way of the rest of their engagement being unlocked? So not wanting to participate in your feedback programs or in other aspects of your business is potentially a symptom of more deep-seated issues. So I would look at a discovery survey to kind of understand, like, is there something going on here that is really the larger issue? It's kind of like with toddlers, you know, like they're gonna throw a fit about a lollipop you won't buy them at the store, but it's really not about that. It's about the fact that they feel like they never get what they want. So I would try to look at if there's any other issues going on there. At the same time, outliers do exist. So you might actually have a really engaged workforce, but you've got that one person who just makes a big stink all the time. And their issues aren't endemic to your business. They're just issues with that one person. So the big stink makes you feel like the whole group stinks, but it doesn't. So I would start by trying to tease out whether it really is just that one person who's an outlier or if it is a systemic problem. And then from there, you can try to ease the systemic problem if that's what it is, or if it's just the outlier, you can figure out what to do with that outlier. One thing that I love about these discovery surveys is that if you're communicating the results back to employees, those people who have negative attitudes, who complain a lot, they think that they're right. They think that, you know, everyone feels this way and I'm the only one who will say it. But if you do a discovery survey, if you conduct a discovery survey and you can publish those results and talk about those results, those people will start to see that actually that's not the case. Nobody else feels this way. It is just them. And soon, you know, they'll kind of lose that bravado. They will realize that it's actually embarrassing to be the person who is constantly negative and constantly complaining because they're not actually representing everybody else. They're just representing themselves in a very negative way.
Okay. All right, here's another question, Megan. How do you get employees to trust that they can voice their constructive criticism without fear of repercussions?
I think this is where action is really important. Show and don't tell. So help those employees who may be afraid to say anything that you are listening and that saying something will result in a positive outcome. So the research here suggests that the best way to do this is to have other employees who have had their problems resolved or had their suggestions implemented to talk about that in front of everybody else. So help employees who have spoken up and who did find resolution to share that story with others. I think a lot of times there's a desire to kind of sweep an issue under the rug. Wow, I'm so glad we were able to deal with that employee, but I hope nobody knows we had to do that. Well, instead, you know, have that employee talk about how they have their issue resolved because they're going to talk about that experience positively. Another example would be, you know, if somebody, one thing that we hear a lot from our customers is, you know, warehouse work can be really tough. A lot of warehouse workers don't feel that they have high utilization. They feel like they have great skills, but they're not using them. And a lot of times what solves that problem is for warehouse workers to gain some autonomy in basic things like how the warehouse is organized or how orders are filled. They know the work and they know how they can improve those things. So letting them do so and then having them talk about it is really important. If somebody from your warehouse comes up with a new way of organizing the warehouse, don't stand up at the company meeting and say that you fixed it. Bring that person up and have that person talk about, hey, I saw a problem. I had this idea, you know, I worked with so-and-so and we ended up changing it and here's how it's going to be from now on. So take action and allow the people who were involved in those actions, who are at the same level as those employees who might be kind of scared of speaking up, to see, you know, to be the ones who talk about it, because seeing is believing.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Here's another question. What if I ask for feedback, but then I don't have the internal bandwidth to dedicate to doing anything with it?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we hear a lot. And my answer is kind of twofold. First of all, I think what this question gets at is, I don't want to ask about something that I can't actually change. And that's correct. Like, that is a correct strategy. Don't ask about how everyone's feeling about benefits if you can't actually change benefits. At the same time, you don't have to solve every problem right away. So benefits might be an issue that employees are concerned about, but there might be another issue that you actually can do something about. So any amount of action that you take on employee voice or feedback is valuable. And when I go out and I do user research and I talk to employees, they understand that leadership can't change everything overnight. And they understand that sometimes they make suggestions and the suggestion is good, but there's just not enough time to implement it, or there's more important things. It's really just about communicating and communicating to employees, if you can't do something, why can't you do it? If you can't, is it that you can't do it now, but you could do it later? Or is it something, something else needs to change before this thing can be changed? So I think it really goes back to communication, and don't ask about things that you don't think you can fix, but also keep in mind that you don't have to fix everything all at once. So if you decide not to deal with this problem in order to deal with another related problem, no one's going to be upset. At the end of the day, problems are getting solved. So nobody's going to be super upset that you didn't solve everything right away with the snap of your fingers.
Great. We have one last question here, Megan. How do you share success rewards across the company with improved efficiencies?
Share success rewards across the company with improved efficiencies. So I think what this question is asking is, like, if you're kind of like going back to the TH Marine example where they were able to become more efficient by making some changes to the organization, potentially. I don't see anything in the chat that would help me understand this question a little bit better, but I think it goes back to using employees' own voice to share, right? Instead of, and that could be if you have a lot of employees, if you have hundreds of employees and you're not going to be having company meetings where someone can stand up, can you put in your newsletter a guest column by the person who came up with this idea, right? Hey, remember when we had that meeting? I'm the person who suggested we buy forklifts, and I just want to say, like, it's working really well, and we welcome your feedback on any other continued improvements, things like that. So I think the answer to this question is, again, communication, but allowing employee voice themselves to be the thing that is communicating, instead of you kind of packaging, here's what happened. Allow employees to communicate with each other, show their voice and display their voice, and really make that link clear between a person used their voice and we had this great outcome.
Megan McNames, you really gave us our money's worth today. Thank you so much for a great webinar. You did a terrific job, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. The only other thing I wanted to say is that you can actually download the slides of my presentation in the GoToWebinar panel under the handout section. But thank you so much. I am glad that you found this valuable. This is something that I love talking about. If anyone here is interested in learning more about measuring your organization and getting started just on some of these discovery processes, I would love to hear from you. My email address is just megan@emplify.com.
Thank you so much. And as usual, the webinar has been recorded and will be available next week. You can find it usually around Wednesday on the Vistage website. Now, upcoming in October, we have a chock-full month of webinars. Friday, October 6th, these are all at 10 a.m. Pacific. Friday, October 6th, Winning the Website War, 4 Steps to Mastering Digital Marketing. Friday, October 13th, the newest approach to creating recurring revenue streams, XaaS. I'm told that means something as a service. Friday, October 20th, Fire Your Website, How Lack of Content Can Kill Your Leads. And Friday, October 27th, Help Wanted, new report outlines how to find and develop talent. On behalf of Vistage Worldwide, this is Bill Black thanking you for joining us for Fridays with Vistage. This concludes the webinar.